African nations should prioritize economic development over democracy. I'm going to start by saying, taking care of people, millions of starving people, is more important than democracy. We have defined democracy as when a nation says we are going to be ruling ourselves, we are going to be doing our own things, no one else should give input because we are a democratic country. That is how we have defined this democracy. So I'm going to start by saying, we have identified a problem, and not just only one problem with this democracy thing. The problems we have actually found out here, Madam Chair, is that first of all, there is underdevelopment in African states. This underdevelopment is causing a lot of problems, not only for the Africans, but for the whole world. The reason why we're saying it's causing problems for the whole world is because when Africans start suffering and stuck up in abject poverty, nations from all over are going to try and come and help. And then that word for them to say democracy does not help anymore, since now they are going to be needing other people to put input in their country. I'm going to go on and say the other problem that we have identified is it's causing social stratification. By this, Madam Chair, I'm talking about a situation whereby the rich become richer, the poor become poorer, and there is a very big variance between. Can you please sit down and have you can start it? Madam Chair, I'm going to go ahead and say, if we look at countries that have prioritized democracy, I'll give you an example of Malawi and Mozambique. These are countries with people who are staying in abject poverty. We can compare this with other countries that have decided that they are going to be putting their people first and say, okay, democracy, yes, there is something like democracy, but we care about the millions of people that are suffering. For example, look at South Africa. South Africa has taken into consideration that the most important thing is for development, where people in that nation are going to be staying in a situation where they are not going to be in abject poverty. Yes, please, I'll take it.
So are you saying there is no democracy in South Africa?
Madam Chair, it seems as if the bench for the opposition is very confused. I have clearly stated, Madam Chair, that in a situation where a country says we have democracy, we as the government has clearly outlined that when we're saying democracy, we mean a state that is saying we are going to be doing our own things and no one is going to be coming to tell us what to do, no one is giving input. So, Madam Chair, we are saying South Africa has found out that it is better to prioritize the people of that country, make them live in a better situation than in other countries that are saying we want democracy and they're subjecting their people to utter and disbelief of abject poverty. Madam Chair, I'm going to go ahead and say, we as a government, as said, we are going to be making sure that in this country, when people from out, can you please be quiet? I'll tell you to talk when I want to. Madam Chair, what I'm saying is this. We as the government have come up and said, we have found we have problems. The first one being that underdevelopment is in nations, especially in African nations that claim that they need democracy. Secondly, we have talked about social stratification. And as a government, we are saying we are going to make sure that there are going to be people that are going to be coming to invest, give us ideas, and if that is working, the government is going to be regulating and making sure that there is not going to be exploitation of resources in any way. I'm going to take your point.
Ma'am, comment on the fact that the largest majority of the black people before independence was worse before they became democrats. Comment on that.
Thank you so much for that. Let me educate you a bit further on that. Madam Chair, democracy as they are stating, they are trying to say they've gained democracy. But looking at the examples I've given you, Madam Chair, we've looked at South Africa. We are not saying there is total democracy. We are talking about democracy here where a state says we have democracy. But the problem here is there is no nation that says it's got total democracy. That is where we are coming from as a government. Saying yes, you're going to be saying the word, we want democracy. But what of the people? Do you need that word in your economy and need that word at the expense of the suffering masses? So we as government are saying, we will make sure that we regulate, Madam Chair, all activities that are going to be done by people that are going to be coming out, and then we are going to make sure that there is going to be a board that is going to be put into place to make sure that there is not going to be exploitation of resources, there is not going to be exploitation of the native people, thereby, Madam Chair, being the government that we are, making sure we are taking care of the people is the duty of the government. I'm going to go on and say, Madam Chair, the government is going to be facilitating in the incorporate investment that is going to be brought by those people. Meaning that, Madam Chair, we are going to be having a better Africa, where we are going to be allowing nations that are going to be coming with constructive words for us, constructive ideas, constructive advice, and we are going to be, Madam Chair, helping the people of Africa to live in a better place. We have said, Madam Chair, we as the government have said the problems our people are facing are not worth the word democracy. That is what we as government are saying. We have given you an example of countries that have said they are going to be taking democracy to be their main thing they're going to be talking about. So as government, we are saying, the most important thing, Madam Chair, is to make sure that people are not suffering. The most important thing, Madam Chair, is to make sure that Africa is developing. The most important, Madam Chair, is making sure that there is no social stratification in economies. The most important, Madam Chair, more than the word democracy, is making sure that the masses do not suffer at the expense of the word democracy. So what are we saying as the government? We are saying, we are making sure we are going to be working hand in hand with the people, making sure they do not suffer. We do not want an economy where the people are suffering. Africa is now known as a poor African continent, seeking help from other countries, yet they are going to be saying, we need democracy. My Deputy Prime Minister is going to come and elaborate further on the things that are highlighted, to tell you what we really mean, Madam Speaker, when we are talking about democracy not being so much important as helping a nation, moving it from abject poverty to a level of a better life. With that, I raise
the Honorable one of the adjudicators in the House of Lords. I stand before you as the leader of opposition, firmly opposing the motion that reads, this House believes that African nations should prioritize economic development over democracy. First of all, I would like to address what the Prime Minister said. She said South Africa is now democratic as a result, is now poor as a result of democracy. But ladies and gentlemen, let's look at South Africa before independence and after independence. The result of independence, which gave birth to democracy, is equal sharing of wealth amongst Africans. And we are saying, if we prioritize democracy over economic development, this is where every other individual within a nation can equally obtain or have access to resources. This is defeated totally with what they're advocating for. Ladies and gentlemen, why are we saying we should not prioritize economic development over democracy? We have defined, or we want to divide democracy into three pillars. There is social democracy, there is economic democracy, and lastly, there is political democracy. What then is social democracy? Social democracy is when all social groups are equal. A scenario whereby we have people controlling the economy and disregarding democracy will result where a special elite of the populace enjoys economic development. And we are saying that it is undesirable. It is what people of Africa fought for during all the liberation struggles. If we are to advocate for this, we are saying, let's take the people back in time. Therefore, it is unacceptable. What then is, sit down, man, I have established. What is economic democracy? Economic democracy is when everyone can access and enjoy economic activities of a nation. And that will be defeated as well. Lastly, political democracy, where we've got people who can choose their leaders, people who can determine who leads them. And we were saying that let's ignore that. We are taking the countries back into time. We are advocating for dictatorship. Let's not sugarcoat it and say we want economic democracy. We want economic development. It is just advocating for dictatorship. And dictatorship has produced nothing. Now, moving forward, what then is democracy? What are the advantages? What are the benefits of democracy? We are saying when there is democracy, people, the masses of a certain country have the ability and capability to choose their leaders. Leaders who will drive the economy to economic development. No, ma'am, sit down. These leaders will be the people who will drive the nation to better economic development. These leaders will also be accountable to the people. We are saying a scenario where African nations prioritize economic development. There will be a certain group of individuals, a certain elite in a particular nation who will be managing and driving and steering and controlling the economy. And we're saying this is very much undesirable. Yes, I'll take it.
Now, can you please clarify to this honorable house the difference between economic democracy and development, and please justify how economic democracy oversees?
Which leads me to my next point. Thank you, sir. Economic democracy, as I defined it before, it is when people of a nation, the people of Africa, have equal access to the benefits of their economic activities. If we were to ignore this, it will mean that a special group of people, the leaders, if I may say, will be the ones who will determine what will happen. And it is a good recipe for corruption. Corruption, which is the main reason why Africa is underdeveloped. I will give you another reason for why Africa is underdeveloped. We've got a colonial legacy, which has left Africa bankrupt. And that is the reason. The colonial legacy was a scenario where democracy was completely ignored. And therefore saying, if we remove that, it will lead to a better scenario. It will also open avenues for economic development. Democracy is the only route, it is the only way where we can have economic development. Why am I saying so? As I said before, if people are given a chance to elect able leaders who are accountable for them, if they mess up, the people will simply remove them through the process of democracy. And if they are good, people will keep them in power through the process of democracy. Therefore, democracy should always, at all times, be prioritized before economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, I will give you an example of what Maputo Seseko did in Uganda. There was no democracy whatsoever. And what was the result? Rampant human rights violation in the name of economic development. That is unacceptable, ladies and gentlemen. Furthermore, we want to look at what will be feasible, what is good in the long term. When democracy is ignored, history has taught us, and history is the best period to look at, there will be social upheavals, there will be revolutions, and these revolutions that make sure there will be no economic development whatsoever. So what is the Prime Minister saying to us? Let's prioritize economic development. Even if they manage to succeed for a certain time, it will be eroded by the social, it will be eroded by the struggles between people. They will be fighting for what? For democracy. My partner is going to come before you and tell us the benefits of maintaining and prioritizing economic democracy and social democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, if I may say, the African Union has a mandate to uphold democracy. Since the African Union has a mandate to uphold democracy, if we say that let's overshadow democracy in the name of economic development, we are simply contradicting ourselves as Africans. It is not within our culture, or it is not within our mandate. As I said before, when there is no democracy, when democracy is not prioritized, there is rampant disregard for human rights. Human rights abuses have been prominent, have been prevalent in nations where there is total disregard for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, my partner will also come and show us how social democracy is also addressed by opposing what the Prime Minister begged to propose. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, I rest my case.
First of all, let us start by highlighting our tipping point as the government. taking care of millions of people who are starving is more important than democracy. And that is our stand, because we're a government that keeps people at heart. We believe that as the government, we've got the mandate to make sure that there's development within our countries, especially all the nations of Africa. But before I go on, Madam Speaker, let me just first of all talk about the outstanding issues that have been highlighted here by the opposition. The opposition here came and defined to us some of the three major differences in terms of democracy, and they've highlighted to us the difference between them. They talked about the three different types of development, which they spoke about social democracy, economic democracy, political democracy, of which the Prime Minister has clearly highlighted and defined what democracy is all about and what is it that we're trying to talk as a hub. So, Madam Speaker, what is it that we are saying as a government? We are saying that we are prioritizing economic development over democracy. Why? Because we believe that even though as Africans we can have that power to control our nations, but we also need development within our people. So as a government, we have seen problems within our state, and these problems we've talked about are underdevelopment within our African societies. And these problems are the major reasons why as the government we are prioritizing to go for economical development rather than democracy. Yes, the power we may have, but what is it that we want? We want the native people of Africa to stand up and live in a very good environment. And how do we create that environment? We want to develop Africa. And how, as the government, have we sorted for that solution? That's why we say we are going to incorporate investment, and those investors that are going to come into the aid of African countries are going to help them. And we've given examples of which the opposition came here and highlighted to us, and it was so bizarre to us, and it was so bizarre to us and puzzling when they said the first statement I quote, Madam Chair, when they said South Africa is poor. For us, we had not even highlighted that. The government had highlighted to you that one evidence of why we are prioritizing development over democracy in terms of Africa, we have got that evidence, South Africa, because they are now becoming a developed country, because they have invested in economical development, in which if you go to South Africa, you see that they've got a better life than most of the other people that we see. Madam Chair, what is it that we are saying as a government? Prioritizing economical development to make sure that the infrastructure in terms of the African societies are going to develop. And what is this? Let's take, for example, in Zimbabwe, the roads that we live in, that we travel in, have got so many portals, and the buildings that we have are from the 1980s. What is it that we want in Africa? We want development to come about. And how do we do that? We said we want to have donors or people who are going to invest in our countries. And how are we going to make sure that there is no exploitation of resources in terms of our African societies? We are going to make sure that the government is going to regulate all those things. And what is that going to help? It is going to bar and hamper corruption within our societies, which means that there is no clear act of corruption that is going to be done by those who are regulating those investments. Yes, I'll take you.
How will you deal with the problem of corruption in African societies when there are no democratic mechanisms to check on them?
We are dealing with democratic issues in which we are saying, when we are talking about control over Africa and over a nation, the leaders that we have, and we are saying people are the ones that have got the choice to choose leaders. And in terms of choosing leaders, it means that they are choosing trustworthy leaders. And regulation of a society, it means we have entrusted rational people whom we believe are going to make sure that all the things that they are going to be doing and all the practice that are going to be done in a country are going to be fair and square. So we believe that hampering corruption is going to be done even in a country where there is prioritizing economic development, because we believe in that. Also, as a government, we saw another problem, Madam Chair. What did we say? Social stratification, where there's a variance between those people who are who are living high life and those who are living low life. And we believe if there is economic development, everyone has got a chance of in terms of equality within the standards of living between the people of Africa. In such a situation where there is now cohesion between the poor and the rich. So we believe as the government, what is it that we are saying? We are saying economical development is important. It is so vital for meeting the basic needs of the growing populace. And we believe that as the government, if we stand our ground in terms of developing our African society, it is going to make sure that Africa is going to emerge as a powerhouse in the whole world. And that's what we believe as a government. Because now, you sit down, I'm no longer going to take any POI. And I want you, Madam Speaker, to believe this. I want you to understand, Madam Speaker, where we are coming from as a government. We believe that Africa has got so many poor people. It has got underdeveloped things. There's poor education in Africa. We have got not enough resources in terms of the upkeep of our fellow people. And what is it that we want? We want to make sure that we develop each other. We develop African society. And if we stand by ourselves, it means that we are not going to be able to sustain ourselves. So as the government, we want to stand and say, Africa has to be developed. Even though we have the power, even though we have the control of our nation, what is it that we want? We want also the investors to come and invest in our countries, in Africa, to make sure that there is development. And in that regard, it will make a better life of every African child to be so well. And with that, Madam Speaker, what is it that we are saying as the government? We are saying we are prioritizing economical development. And economical development is going to make sure, like the problems we have talked about, underdevelopment, social stratification, and all those things that are affecting our African people, it is going to make sure it eradicates all those things. So that's why we, as the government, we are ruling over economic development. We are prioritizing economical development over democracy. And this is what we stand as a government. With that, Madam Speaker, we beg to propose.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand in front of you with my partner to oppose the motion that reads that this House believes that African nations should prioritize economic development over democracy. Now, my partner came forward and identified the root cause of underdevelopment within Africa, and explained that we have had a colonial legacy where there was no democracy. And during that colonial legacy, ladies and gentlemen, we had suffering of the majority of the black indigenous people of Africa. People went through liberation struggles and attained independence, attained democracies. And as a result of that, we have had economic development for the majority of the people. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we are simply stating, ladies and gentlemen, is that democracy is a means to an end, and means to an end, and the end being economic development. Economic development without democracy leads to no development for the whole of Africa, but it takes us back to the colonial legacy. Now, I'll go further. I'd like to now to see how we have, I'd like to now to correct some deficiencies that have been coming from the government side. They came forward and said that prioritizing economic development over democracy will lead to the balancing will lead to less stratification of society. We beg to differ on that. We actually state that there is more equality in a democratic society. And why we're saying there's more equality in a democratic society, there's more equality because leaders will be made to share the wealth of the nation, the cake of the nation, with the individual people in there, because they are held accountable by the people. How are they held accountable by the people? They're held accountable through elections. If they don't perform well, either polluting the country's economic growth, then we get leaders who are capable. Such as that is happening in Zimbabwe right now. We want indigenization, so that we want to embark on the program of indigenization, so that we can share the wealth which was taken away by the whites before independence with the majority of the people. And then they all further on said that economic development will lead to investment in the country. But we beg to differ on that. How do we say it? Why are we differing? We're saying that investors will not invest in a country that is corrupt. Investors will not invest in a country where there is no stability. Let me explain further on that. Let me explain further on that. If you prioritize economic development over democracy, it it will mean that there are no checks and balances to make sure that leaders don't loot the resources of the people. So what we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that once you have a corruption commission, once you have a police force, once you have all those other organs of the state, they'll make sure that there's less corruption in society. But we see that if you have a dictatorship, there's high incidences of corruption. There's less corruption in a democracy and more corruption in an undemocratic state. Also, they came forward and said that South Africa is prioritizing economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa first went through democratic elections so that they could have the economic development for the majority of the black people that they're enjoying right now. So therefore, it totally contradicts their very own argument that they've been stating. South Africa is a very good example. It's the most developed nation in Africa. And South Africa has the best constitutions in the world. South Africa has checks and balances between the judiciary, the judiciary. I'll take it now.
Prioritizing economic development and rolling it out is different. Do you agree with me?
Ladies and gentlemen, I've already stated that we're not rolling out economic development, but we're saying that democracy is a stepping stone to economic development. That's what we're saying. And also, let's look at the end goal of economic development. Economic development should lead to the happiness of the general populace because they've got healthcare, they've got basic infrastructure, they've got education. The people should have happiness. And an index that has been carried out internationally has revealed that one of the most democratic nations, which is Sweden, has the happiest people in the world. And why are they the happiest people in the world? Because, ladies and gentlemen, of the democratic nature of the state. There is better sharing of resources. It is the most equal society within the world. So at the end of the day, if we take away that important stepping stone, that being of democracy, we might have economic development, yes, but one, it will not lead to the happiness of the people. Secondly, and very importantly, it will not last long. Democracy leads to lasting economic development. Why am I saying that, ladies and gentlemen? Look at the autocratic governments that have existed in Africa. With Mobutu Sese Seko, with the Gaddafi regime, with all these regimes have collapsed at the end of the day. And why have they collapsed? Because the people who were not sharing in the cake, the people who do not have social democracy, ended up fighting for their rights. And how did they fight for it? Through armed struggle, and the result of that, there was no stability. And the result of that, those dictatorships collapsed, they crumbled. But democracies are still standing. Democracies are very strong. And we're stating that we want a long-term economic development. Where we have the government of the people, by the people. And that is democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, what have we come forward to say to you? We've stated that democracy leads to economic democracy. The sharing of the wealth between all the citizens in the country. But in a dictatorship, there is less of that allocation because there's no checks and balances. We've stated to you that economic democracy leads to the opening of political space between people so that the people all have a fair share and contribution within the political alignment of their government. And as a result of that, it ensures that they're capable leaders who can drive them to upward social mobility and economic development. We've also stated that it actually provides a check and balance on corruption, therefore leading to more investment at the end of the day, the investors that were actually clamoring for. We've also stated that it is in line with the African mandate of promoting democracy within African region. Democracy leads to stability, and therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is the longest lasting economic development we will have is under democracy. The government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let's prioritize democracy over economic development.
Madam Chair, it's quite interesting how the opposition bench believes that a side government, we are pushing for an instance whereby we are foregoing democracy as a whole. But we are saying a side government, let's prioritize economic development over democracy. We are going to highlight, as closing government, issues we feel are of paramount importance that leads to us prioritizing economic development over democracy. But before I go to that, I'll just address some issues that are raised by sides of the government. They speak of that the root cause of the whole problem in Africa is the colonial legacy. But if we look at most African countries, with the exception of South Africa, all these countries have attained independence for over 2 decades, ladies and gentlemen. That's time enough for them to overcome those colonial legacies if they were to implement successful and strong economic policies to develop their societies, if they are really democratic states. We look at the issue that they talk of equality, that because of equalities, leaders they share resources with the poor. But we see an instance in Africa whereby the so-called democratic states, for example, South Africa has a social elite, the so-called BEEs, who are actually benefiting a lot compared to the poor men on the street. So is there any social equality brought about by democracy? We beg to wonder. Now, they also spoke of the UN mandate being to abolish democracy. But it's also the UN's mandate to ensure sustainable development so that all African countries reach the Millennium Development Goals, in particular, one to eradicate poverty. As you all know, most African states are living in abject poverty. Now, as side government, we see that there are a lot of side effects that come with prioritizing democracy. For instance, the first issue that we can look at is the cost that comes with democracy. There's a cost of a financial burden that comes with democracy, where we find that countries invest millions of dollars in elections that at the end of the day, the Western countries deem as illegitimate or as not being free and fair, because they have their own standard of free and fair. Further on, there's a loss in life that comes with this particular democracy. We take an example of Kenya. Kenya, a few years back, when Mwai Kibaki ran along against Raila Odinga, 1,200 people lost their lives as a result of that one party was not agreeing to accept the results of the elections. Now, moving further on, ladies and gentlemen, we look at that the problem with citizens. We look at that the problem with Africa as a result, as its politics, is that Africa dwells much on popularistic politics, where it's not about who is capable, but it's about who is most popular. Now, we see that the very same so-called popularistic people might not actually have the particular skill to govern and run a particular nation. Now, moving further on, we believe that, unlike what side the government was saying when they say economic development is a result of democracy, we believe that for us to have a stable democracy, we must have sustainable and stable economic development. Now, we are going to look at a simple example in the context of Nigeria. If you look at Nigeria having attained democratic rule, or started the practice of democracy from 1999 under Olusegun Obasanjo, we find that since then, there still has been conflict in the Niger Delta as regards to the oil resources that are there. Now, we find that people are at conflict because they are not seeing the fruits of economic development. There's no economic development within that particular region. So, is Nigeria going to be stable without economic development in the Niger Delta? Or the companies that are harvesting oil, they are going to continue to suffer persecution from aggrieved citizens of that particular area. So we believe that if we address the issues of development first, then we are going to avoid instances whereby they are going to be uprising as a result of that.
Sir, how do we hold our leaders accountable for attaining the so-called MDGs if we do not have democratic processes to do so?
Madam Chair, in answering them, it's one simple example. If we take Libya, for instance, before the overthrow of the Muammar Gaddafi regime, Libyan people were amongst the most and greater livelihood as compared to now. As you can see, the quest for democracy in Libya has led to a scenario. Now people are living in absolute poverty. Infrastructure has been destroyed. As a result attain democracy. So are we now saying, let's prioritize the instance whereby we destroy our own economy for us to have leadership? Or we vie for a scenario whereby let's first develop an economy that is sound, economic development that is sound, such that we eradicate poverty in society. We eradicate poverty in society and educate all the stakeholders within society. That is the children who are out there failing to access basic education. Madam Speaker said, are we not going to achieve all democratic principles at a later stage after having empowered the very same people that we are going to need? Now, moving to further points, it's of importance as African societies that we build state economies. They spoke of the example of South Africa. But if you look at South Africa inherited an already developed economy. South Africa having attained its independence only in 1994. Already the white colonial apartheid regime had done all the necessary structures to ensure that the South African economy was sound and stable. Now, that is a clear testament of that economic development can lead to a better democratic society. So let's prioritize economic development before we speak of democracy. Now, we believe as a society, government, that for our people to be content in society, for governments to have people who listen to them, the government first has to address issues to deal with. Because if we address economic development, we address issues of poverty, we address issues of attaining and empowering all citizens, be it economically or through education. Now, as to regards the issues of corruption, corruption is also evident within societies that are democratic. We have a simple example of Zambia under President Chiluba, who embezzled millions of dollars right under the nose of the Anti-Corruption Commission of Zambia. So that's telling enough that even the so-called flawless democratic structures have flaws after all. So let's prioritize it.
Issue of Zambia, where he's saying Chiluba was corrupt under the nose of democracy. But just after the tenure of his office, Chiluba was arrested. Why? Because Zambia is a democratic country. So what it does is democracy entails accountability. Okay. And also, we talked about high election costs. Yes, we agree that there are high election costs. But high election costs to produce what? To produce high economic advancement. Okay. I'll come to more, but I was excited to continue with my issues. As I wait, what happened in the first half of the debate? We have the opening government. They didn't tell us exactly what is prioritized, but everyone assumes that by prioritizing to put first, right? And in this case, we are saying putting first economic development vis-a-vis democracy. But what we are saying as the opposition is, as we were moved by the leader of opposition, we are saying let's move democracy first. Why? Because economic development is a brainchild or is a byproduct of democracy. That's our stance as the opposition. Okay, and we as the closing opposition are coming in and want to allude to the human rights view. It's a global human rights view from the United Nations, and the human rights view on the constitution that has been recently endorsed in Zimbabwe. In the constitution that was recently endorsed in Zimbabwe, there are what are called economic rights, political rights, and civil rights. When I'm looking at economic rights, every citizen has the right to access the resources that are found within that country. That's one of the fundamental basis of democracy, which are applying in Zimbabwe. Okay, what are the results of a democratic situation? Why are we saying is the closing opposition? A democratic environment will bring out economic development. Okay, what they are saying is a democratic situation brings accountability. Right now, if you go to Central African Republic, there are conflicts. Why? The government that was there, which had failed to adopt the democratic principles, lost the accountability of the resources that are found in Central African Republic. And as a result, there was a coup. Why? Because people have not seen accountability of the resources that are mined, of the minerals that were found in that country. And there is no economic development where people have no trust with the government, which is leading them. Okay. And point number 2, civil disobedience. It creates civil disobedience. Why? Remember, it is the government that comes up with economic policies. And if the government is a dictator, like the Mama Gaddafi government, right? You will see that Mama Gaddafi was more richer than the Libyan state itself. Okay. So what you are saying here is people tend to disobey. Why? Because it will be, the economic policies will be driven or will be coming out from one man. Whereas people, because of the advanced education that they have, they want to contribute in the economic policy making of their countries. So people will resist the policies that will be advanced by the government. And as a result, will end up having coups and setbacks in projects. Okay. And also civil resistance, people will retaliate. Right? Well, what they are saying here is the government proposes a policy, an economic policy. But because this policy was centered on the government alone and not driven from the people will tend to retaliate or to fight back because they are not part of the policy making. People want to be involved and they feel happy practicing economic policies that they have put in place, that they have contributed in making. I thank you.
I am aware that economic policies and economic development are centered on the people, not government officials.
Okay. Let me address this issue by ending or I touch on the issue of manifestos. In democratic countries, towards election, all the presidents or all the aspiring presidents come with the manifestos, and people go there to hear their economic perspectives or their economic policies, right? And this happened even in Zimbabwe towards the just ended election. People had to go and listen for the economic policies. Would they benefit anything according to the policy that will be given by the candidates? So we are saying here, it is the government that makes the policies, right? And it is that government that makes the policies. The policies, they are not driven from the people. That's now a dictator. People will not contribute to that. People will tend to relax or leave it to the government to do it alone. So there ought to be corrupt cooperation between the government and the people. So they will not, we want to have a viable economic development in such a situation. Okay, and democracy enhances or brings about patriotism. People tend to love their country if they are involved in the policy making of that country, right? If people participate in making the policies, people will love their country. It will develop a sense of belonging and a sense of responsibility. People who manipulate the resources responsibly. Why? Because they feel we are part of this country. We are part of the policy making. We are part of whatever is happening in that country. Unlike in a situation whereby one man is over all the policies that are made.
Information.
I take it.
Effective and honest governments are lacking in more African countries than the rest. Do you agree with me?
Okay. He's saying effective governments are lacking. Of course, effective governments are lacking, but not. If we have democracy in Africa, if we have effective democracy in Africa, you will see that our economies will go up, right? What they are saying then is, economic development comes after there is a well-established democracy. Why? Because if there is no well-established democracy, people will not participate in the economy of that country. People tend to draw back the wishes or the endeavors of the government. And in this case, let me allude to you the situation that happened in Central African Republic. Right? The government had its economic policies, but people saw that because of the authoritarian system that was being used, only those who were close to the government or to the ruling party were benefiting at the expense of the whole nation. They don't know about suffering, these guys, to our government side. But they don't know suffering comes in many ways. Suffering doesn't only come in lack of economic values or variables. Suffering may also come politically. So what they are saying here is, this does not address, their case does not address the issue of suffering.
My key word in this debate is to spice it up and show you why we're holding this debate. Now, firstly, the government comes into the flow and shows us the pros and cons, but I'll address the drive behind the motion. The drive behind the motion, Madam Chair, is to see what oversees what between economic development and democracy. Now, the member of government highlighted the fact that the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, said, let's find stability in order to achieve democracy. He was referring to the Delta region, which was in drawn conflict. So, Madam Chair, what has transpired in this debate is the opening government really highlighted the problems that need to be addressed in Africa in the context of democracy and in the context of economic development. Now, the problems that we highlighted by the opening government is underdevelopment in Africa, and also poverty and social stratification and also poor education. Madam Chair, the opposition bench comes into the floor and fails to show us how they're going to alleviate these problems. They start muttering about social democracy, economic democracy, as well as political democracy. But they fail to show us how these particular democracies that they are vying for, how are they going to address the four problems that they put forward in this debate. Now, Madam Chair, we are saying as government, let's achieve economic development and democracy for all. Now, we are saying, Madam Chair, in order to alleviate the poverty, and in order, again, Madam Chair, to address the misconception of the misuse and embezzlement of funds in the African continent, let us buy for government policies that address economic development. Now, the very shocking part, Madam Chair, when we were sitting as the government bench, the leader, the deputy leader of the opposition says, election will address the aspect of economic development. But they failed to show us how elections are going to do that. Because as far as I'm concerned, Madam Chair, each and every African country has made elections, has undergone elections, but we still have no problems, Madam Chair. What are we saying about that? It's very sure that the opposition debate does not even understand the context of this debate. We are moving on to the closing part. Now, what I'm saying is, let's look at the achievement of the Millennium Development Goal, which includes the sustainable development. How do we achieve sustainable development, Madam Chair? That is, let us focus on the full utilization of resources. Why am I saying full utilization of these resources, Madam Chair? It is because we understand that Africa is the hub of all resources. Why should we be suffering? And they still buy that, they still buy and say, elections will keep the problem. Elections will keep the problem. What we need are good structures. Let me just give you the context of Nigeria. Obasanjo in 2000, Madam Chair, brought forward the context of the Niger Delta Development Commission to address the looting of the resources in the Delta region, and that is to address the aspect of misuse of resources in order to achieve democracy. You have to be in a step economy, because how do you expect elections to address the very same problems that you highlighted?
It's not the strategy that particular commission Nigeria, a process of democracy.
It's that achieving the ZNDC an aspect of democracy. Now I'll go back to and reiterate what the fashions are saying. Let's achieve stability, and that is economic stability, and then achieve democracy. When people are in the they are willing to conform. Now the closing opposition, Madam Chair, I'm very disappointed indeed. They come here and start talking about economic rights, they talk about economic policies, they don't even talk about patriotism. And the first most notion, Madam Chair, is manifestos. As a marketing manager, it's very simple. Manifestos are used as a marketing strategy. They don't address the problem. So we are saying let us buy something that will address the problem, and we are saying as government Chair, let us address problems that are going forward. Now let us address the problems that are going forward. That is underdevelopment. Now that's underdevelopment, poverty, social stratification, and poor education in order to achieve the democracy that they are saying is supersedes economic development. Madam Chair, democracy follows suit. Stability, self-audit. Now we are moving on to say, Madam Chair, let us address economic development because it is a reaction to the Africa. Can you imagine with all the resources that sit? Now all the resources being looted. point it. Now all the resources being looted, Madam Chair, and what happens to Africa? Africa is still suffering from poverty.
Do you have a guarantee that people will develop economically when there's no democracy?
He says, do I have a guarantee? Now, the very funny part, Madam Chair, is I alluded to that fact that let's find stability and achieve democracy. Now, South Africa itself as a context, they found the economic best and utilized their very own resources. They found stability. And what are they doing now? They have found the base of democracy. Because when an economic development is achieved, then democracy follows suit. Because democracy can only be achieved when a society is stable economically. And well, Sweden is happy because they have found the very same economic development. They achieved economic development, and therefore democracy follows suit. Now, Madam Chair, this essence and also the meaning of this debate was to realize which one to prioritize. And as government base, we have shown you, Madam Chair, that democracy follows suit behind. So they're talking about the social rights, economic rights, and democracy. So we are saying as government bench, this debate is centered on the realization and also the context of the full utilization of the African resources to achieve this so-called democracy, because democracy policy. So as the closing government, Madam Chair, and as the government bench, we are going to this debate because they have failed to show us what is the brought forward by the very same government that we are related to as the closing government. We are holding this debate, Madam Chair, because we are saying, let us find economic stability and address the problems that we have. And overall, in all, democracy will follow suit.
Now, the issue that we have here is what comes first. Is it democracy or it's economic development? Now, this side of government is saying we think or we feel that democracy is the basis. It is the fulcrum where principles of economic development can be founded upon. Democracy is the bedrock where economic development should be. So what we are saying is, this side of government is saying that what we need first is economic development. But this side of government, this opposition is saying the first thing that we need is for us to make sure that we have a stable democracy. Do we have the fertile ground to make sure that economic development can proceed? Because we are saying there is no guarantee that if economic development comes first, then the democracy. But what we are saying is democracy is what we need as Africans. We need the right of the people to participate in the national interest, in the national issues. Number one, we have told you, we explored the relationship between the government and its people. What we are saying is, for the people to participate, to make sure that there's economic development, there is need for them to be trust between those people and the government, without which there is no economic development to entertain. The people are likely to participate more in the economy of their country when, number one, they have trust on the government that they have. So that it cannot happen where there is no democracy. People, they need to participate. People, they need to be involved. When the people feel that we are not being involved, we have explored issues in Passion and we said, when the people are not involved, it's likely to create many issues. Number one, we have talked about the issue of accountability. No one wants to live in a state where they don't have accountability of the resources that are there. So only a democratic government can help us achieve that. Number two, we have talked about the issue of civil resistance. We have seen scenarios and situations where people resist the government that is in place simply because those people are not participating in that country. So we have talked about the civil, economic, and political rights of a person. With the growing levels of education that we have, anyone would want to participate in a country's politics or in a country's in the economy of their country. So we are saying that where there is democracy, there is an open society. People are free to express their views or to air their views, even through the use of the ballot. A scenario where we find where there is no economic development. So what we are saying again is the issue of sabotage. We have seen a situation where people can sabotage that. That is the issue of coups that we're talking about. People will be sick and tired of that. And when there is war or when there are coups, do we have any economic development then? Definitely not. Such is the case that we are moving from this side of the government. This side of the government, they come here and then they talk about the issue of alleviating poverty first.
We cannot alleviate poverty where there is no democracy. Because where there is democracy, we have seen that where democracy exists, it becomes the good ground to make sure that economic development is fostered. And when economic development is fostered, number one, it is going to last. So they are giving us a solution for today, but we are coming with a solution that lasts. A solution that makes sure that Africa goes forward to develop. They talk about the issue of eradicating poverty. You do not eradicate poverty where there is no democracy. What we are saying, number one, is democracy should be founded on the principles of trust. The relationship between the government and its people, such then becomes the basis where an economy can go forward. So the issue that we have here is not about the issue of the issue that we are advancing is we are saying democracy first. Number one, people are the greatest stakeholders in a democracy. Alright? So if people are the greatest stakeholder in a country, they are the people, the very same people that you not want to give democracy, are the very same people that you want to make sure that you want to propel the economy forward. So we are saying those people are bound to resist that one. And the economic development that you're talking about, it will not be found. Yes, sir.
Gambia is independent and democratic since 1965. Does it resolve issues to deal with poverty?
Now there are two issues that we are talking about here. When you have got poor economic policies, that does not mean that you do not have democracy. Democracy is a system of governance. And in democracy now, when a government has been elected democratically, it then begins to further forward economic principles. That means the backing of the very same people that are in that country. That is why we are saying the very same people that are in that country will now not participate simply because there is no democracy. So economic development, it is shouldered by the people, alright? And those people we are saying, number one, they will never participate in the economy of a country where they are not being involved, alright? And number two, we are saying that those people are likely to sabotage, that they are likely to uprise against the government, and that will lead, and what will that lead to? It's going to lead to an unstable society. And what happens to an unstable society? There is no economic development that takes place in an unstable society. And then, we are talking about the issue of patriotism. The people are more patriotic to a government that they chose, to a government that they trust. They are likely to participate in the policies, economic policies of a government simply because they trust that particular government. Alright? So what we are saying, democracy is the thing that we should achieve first as Africans. Then after that, we'll make sure that economic policies comes. That is why the Western world is developed right now. Number one, there is democracy. So democracy now is the guarantor of economic development. Such is the case that we are advancing here. So the first time of the government, we have decided this opening government saying we want the people to live, we want the people to prosper economically, we want to alleviate poverty, we want the right of saying, we want that right we want to end starvation in the people. So what we are saying, our response to that is starvation, you will not end it where there is no democracy. When there is no democracy, there is bound to be chaos. And when there is chaos, there is no economic development. So all the things that you are saying pose now in this debate. Number two, we are saying that, number two, this closing side comes here and then they say, they talked about popularistic, the issue of popularistic politics, and they're advancing the case of saying that they were given examples of countries where they are saying there was economic development first and then democracy came second. But we beg to differ there. What we are saying is democracy is what comes first. Take away democracy in South Africa and you see what will happen economically. So, such is the case that we are coming up now from this side of the government. I want to show you how side closing opposition wins this debate. We win this debate because we have given you the key issues that are at stake here. We have shown you that where there is no democracy, there is chaos. We have shown you the attitudes of the people in a situation, in a scenario where there is no democracy. We have shown you how the people will not participate, because they are the important stakeholders. We have shown you how the people will not participate in a country where they are not given the right to choose who they want to. So based on that now, we are saying democracy comes first. After democracy comes, then economic policies